All right. So, Happy New Year, everybody. For today, we're just going to essentially be doing a 2023 hot wash. Of course, the main focus of this is to discuss our favorite movies of 2023, but we're also just going to kind of go through, talk about maybe some surprises, some disappointments, and just our overall feelings when it came to 2023. So, to get us started, I'll go ahead and throw it over to you.
All right. Yeah. So 2023 for me, I thought was a pretty strong year for these overall. I have quite a few that out of what I saw this year, I'd say a good chunk are ones I'd at least give like a 3 out of 5 and above to. So that was always good to see. So for my honorable mentions, I just kind of wanted to go through since we're really kind of deep diving in our top five, for my honorable mentions, I just kind of wanted to speed run through what was ultimately my 10 through 6. So I'm sort of going to refer to them as such in the honorable mentions category just because I ranked all the movies I had seen this year just all together. So I'm going to refer to them by those numbers for these honorable mentions. But just real quick, so my number 10, I had Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. This is a movie that really flew under the radar. It came out, I believe, like early on in the year, one of those like January releases, I believe. So, like, those typically get pushed under the rug. But Covenant, it stars Jake Gyllenhaal, Dar Salim, Anthony Starr is in it, Alexander Ludwig is in it. It's like a modern war film set in Afghanistan, but it's just a very emotional and compelling sort of tale about brotherhood, loyalty, friendship, sacrifice. Just really good, really compelling, especially with the two main characters that are the main characters in that. Just very, very compelling. You get very invested in their story, and it's sort of just like one of those human interest stories about like triumph and overcoming obstacles together. My number 9 is a movie that I had discussed previously in my favorite Christmas movies. My number 9 spot is The Holdovers, directed by Alexander Payne. Yeah, it stars Paul Giamatti, Dominic Sessa, Davine Joy Randolph. As I discussed in the Christmas list that I had, this is just such a charming and very emotionally impactful holiday film. Really, just about family and companionship and all of those good things that are very important around the holidays. It definitely has become already, just upon a first viewing this year, a holiday staple for me where I feel like I will definitely rewatch this every holiday season moving forward, and maybe sometimes not even in the holiday season. This was a breakout role for Dominic Sessa. This was literally the first time he'd ever played in a film, and he is excellent. And it honestly, like, genuinely surprised me when I found out it was his first time acting in a film. So he did great. I do think that Paul Giamatti delivers probably his best performance that I've seen, at least. I think he definitely is a shoe-in to at least be nominated for a best actor role. And as well, Davine Joy Randolph, who I wasn't familiar with in anything else, she was excellent in this as well. And I could also potentially see like a best supporting actress, at least nomination for her as well. So that is my number 9. My number 8 is Killers of the Flower Moon. Which might come as a surprise because historically, especially on this podcast, I've said I'm not particularly a Scorsese fan, but I did really enjoy this. This is one of the movies that I would say is higher up on out of the Scorsese movies I've seen. I really did enjoy this movie. It's sort of just a tale about, man's greed and depravity and, how greed, one of the things I really appreciated it is, no one has their hands clean. Everyone's greedy. The rich in the movie are greedy. The poor in the movie are greedy. Even the people in the middle are greedy. So it's really just about man and sort of depravity and how our greed affects not only individuals, but society as a whole. Obviously, DiCaprio is great. I wouldn't quite say that, like, oh, this is the ultimate, Leo performance because he's just been in so many great roles, but he still is great here. De Niro is great. Lily Gladstone is great. And, I'm a huge fan of, history and true crime. And this is sort of one of those intriguing true crime real life stories. My number 7 is Dumb Money, which was a movie that came out, also kind of flew under the radar, sort of like The Covenant. This one came out in the fall season. during another slow time of movies about the shorting of GameStop stock that happened in 2021. So it's sort of like one of these the Big Short sort of movies. It's like this fun, high energy, fast paced story about the crazy true story about how a bunch of internet people, screwed over a bunch of billionaires shorting GameStop stock in 2021. So it was really funny while it was also very educational and informative. And I sort of like that subgenre. And Paul Dano is the lead here. And I just think he's sort of like, especially in the wake of the Batman, I think he's sort of like having this like career renaissance now. And I'm happy to see it because, of course, he's a very quirky and charismatic lead. And then my number 6 for the last of my honorable mentions and closing out this section of my top 10, I am going with The Killer, David Fincher's most recent film that came to Netflix. Fincher is, as I have said on this podcast, my favorite director, at least my favorite director working right now. And it was just great to see Fincher back. Fassbender stars in it, and he is incredible as this main character, the titular killer. It really is sort of like a slow burn, but ultimately it was just so engaging to watch the plot unfold because it is a slow burn, but David Fincher sort of excels at telling slow burn stories in such an intriguing way, an engaging way where it's just little plot points just building and building and you're kind of along the whole ride. And of course there's some good thrills and action along the way. I think in a way it might actually be Fincher's funniest film. Like it's not like a comedy, but there's like it really is sort of funny when you watch it through the lens of it's like somewhat dark humorous and somewhat satirical because the titular killer sort of thinks he's this superior being, this ubermensch, emotionless, whatever, and he kind of sucks at it. And it's just really it just has like a very dry and very subtle sense of humor that I didn't catch when I first watched it. But if you like rewatch it, knowing that it actually has those dark humor elements that David Fincher has mentioned, it actually is pretty funny. And so, yeah, that is my honorable mentions list, just kind of scaling through my number 10 through number 6 for the year.
All right. I will say one of the ones you listed is also on my honorable mentions, and you'll be very happy by the one I have listed. Do you mind real quick just restating 10 through 7?
Yes, number 10 is Guy Ritchie's The Covenant. Number
Mhm.
9 is The Holdovers. Number 8
Mhm.
was Killers of the Flower Moon. And number
Mhm.
7 was Dumb Money.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. It was number 10 was the one I was thinking of. Okay. So, first and foremost, before I talk, I feel like this is worth stating from the beginning. Obviously, when talking about lists like this, it's bound to be subjective. However, mine's going to be a very weird list. It was a weird 2023 for me. A lot of the movies I ended up watching were either not the big blockbusters that were in theater and they were the indie stuff that was at home, or I've had on a list for a while and just haven't gotten a chance to watch them. Totally my fault, but I'm just putting it out there. My list is going to feature a lot of stuff that's probably not that you wouldn't think would be here, and that's just I wanted to put that out there. And I mentioned this because Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, I think I've literally had on my list. Didn't you say it came out in January?
I think so. I'd have to confirm that, but it was one of those like really early on in like one of the dead spaces, so like hardly anyone saw it.
Yeah, so that because I like Guy Ritchie so much, I've had that on a list for a while. We actually over the holiday break, we chose to watch Kandahar instead of The Covenant because I normally do movies either with my mom or dad. That's how I get a chance to watch them. So when he had really wanted to see Kandahar, so I went with it, and not. I'm gonna assume not as good as The Covenant, but so so yeah, there's gonna be a lot of that, kind of like you said, where you think it was a pretty good year for 2023. I had a relatively hard time making this list. There are there are there were a lot of movies that I kind of like. I didn't dislike that I watched, but I didn't feel like there were a lot of movies that I feel like I would hold in high regards moving forward. So just yeah, part of it's of course, like I said, my lack of seeing a lot of the big ones. But for me personally, 2022 didn't necessarily hold up compared to some other years. Like when I know we did the favorite horror movie every year, going through the nostalgia of some of those years, at least for me, I feel like I'd pick a couple more over 2023, but that's not necessarily that these movies were bad. But yeah, it was really weird because I didn't have a hard time making this list because I disliked a lot of movies. It's just a lot of them were kind of good, and I don't know, not like not memorable is not the right word for me, especially when I do favorite lists. I always talk about there's between a good movie and a bad movie. When I pick my favorites, rewatch value is like the highest thing that I put on my list. Like, would I rewatch this again? And so for me, a lot of these were good when I watched them, but I don't know if I would rewatch them again. So that was kind of how I was trying to do my list. Sorry for that little opener rant there, but so yeah, The Covenant's been on my list, but I haven't watched it yet. Then I know you mentioned The Holdovers. I put it on my list. I haven't watched it yet. I had only kind of heard about it until we just recently filmed the Christmas podcast, and then you kind of won me over. Killers of the Flower Moon will probably never see. I already forgot your 7. No, Dumb Money. Dumb Money I also did not have on my list. Unless my dad randomly says, "Hey, do you want to watch this?" I don't see that one jumping some of the other ones I have on it. And then I'm gonna skip talking about number 6 because spoiler alert, that's the one I have on my list.
All right, I look forward to that discussion
then. So I'll do similar to what you did. I'll do 10 through 6. Once again, just to reiterate. Until you kind of get into my top picks, a lot of these I just thought were good, and my ranking is very loose, we'll say. So at number 10, I have Old Dads. This was relatively surprising. I didn't really know a lot about it. I just kind of was like, oh, it's going to be another one of those Netflix movies where they kind of throw a bunch of money and, here you go. But I was very surprised. I laughed at like every joke. It was very funny. I have it so low because of the rewatch value. The story is very cut and dry. It's a classic one we've seen before. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but since I've already laughed at the jokes and a lot of them have to do with not knowing that they're coming, I don't know necessarily how much rewatch value it would have, but very good when I watched it. Number 9, I have The Boogeyman. This one, I know you had mentioned it was based on a Stephen King short story. I had not read that before watching this movie. After we talked about it, I went and read it. Would not have done that if I didn't like the movie. I definitely could see what you were talking about with the differences and the creative liberty and whatnot. I generally just liked it. I thought it was pretty solid. I don't really like supernatural stuff normally, so could be some sort of bias just for me, but like when a supernatural movie happens to make me like it, I generally favor it more. So that one's at 9. Number 8, I have Saw X. I think you probably remember from our conversations before, I was so upset that the 10th Saw movie was not a second Spiral, so I think I probably was prejudiced towards this movie leading up to actually seeing it. I wasn't even really excited. I was just going because I love Saw. And there's a chance that probably helped that I had the bar so low because it was actually really good. I think you said it was your favorite horror movie of 2023. I have a couple horror movies higher than it. However, that's not necessarily to say that this one's bad. It was personally surprising for me how good it ended up being. So this one's my number 8. My number 7 is The Killer, like you mentioned. I have this one so high also kind of for surprise factor for myself. This is the first one on my list that I would purposefully go out of my way to rewatch. I did like it a lot. I normally don't like these kinds of movies, which is why I have it so high, because it was a movie in this type of, with this type of storytelling that actually hooked me. So I give it a lot of credit. The one thing I don't remember if you talked about this, the one thing I wanted to speak on was it's a quote unquote action movie with not a lot of action. However, it's extremely realistic. And what I mean by that is there's like one really big action scene kind of in the center where it's not like, oh, John Wick, where he's going to take on 100 guys at once and never die. Fincher did such a good job, in my opinion at least, of making it really feel like these are two real dudes who are just going at it, and this could actually happen. I very much appreciated the fact that he used the film style of like a martial arts movie, but made it more realistic as opposed to like when you watch martial arts movies where they're doing 20 roundhouse kicks that you never do in real life. So for definitely coming from the martial arts guy, I have a huge respect for that sequence, and I like the movie as a whole. I love Fassbender as an actor, so that definitely helped. He blew the role out of the part. And then, sorry, out of the park. And then my number 6 honorable mention is Champions. Um, this was a great movie. So Woody Harrelson is a disgraced basketball coach who has to do community service by coaching a disabled team of players, and they are mentally or physically disabled in some way. Uh, and so there's a lot of jokes. It is a comedy. Uh, I may have liked this more than some others because I'm a huge basketball fan, and a lot of the jokes are basketball jokes, which made it awesome. His co-star is Sweet D from Always Sunny, which probably helped because I like that show. But yeah, I like Woody Harrelson. I think he's funny. It also helps that he played basketball in real life. He's a good basketball player. Everything that he did in the movie was real. They literally brought in basketball coaches to help train real mentally disabled people on how to play basketball. That was another thing they used. All the actors were first time actors. They went and got real mentally disabled people. The lead one should be acting in a million more movies. He absolutely blew it out of the park. He was the best part of the movie. He was hilarious. I would watch it again just for him 20 times over. But yeah, it was great. It was heartwarming. It kind of hit every spot you'd want it to. I guess the only knock is I think it's like 2 hours, and it maybe didn't have to be that long, but I mean they just shoved in more jokes and it was funny. So take that as you will. But I would probably say Champions and The Killer maybe close to each other. It's not like a full 6 and 7, but I'm gonna give the basketball comedy just a slight edge.
Yeah, so I did not see Old Dads. I'm not a huge Bill Burr fan. I kind of have the same. I know you alluded to having this similar prejudice where it's like, oh, it just looks like some other Netflix thing that Netflix put out there. So I can't honestly say that I would have much interest in watching that. But but yeah, The Boogeyman I did see. I think we talked about it a little bit. I did like it. It's more in like the middle of just like my overall list of what I saw in 2023. But as you said, I'm a big Stephen King fan. I like the original short story. This does take the sort of like general premise and like turns it into a movie. But I just personally am partial to that original short story. I find it to be much more like, creepy and terrifying in its own way. But I still did really like this. I think I gave it like a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5. And yeah, it just did really well with especially like lighting and sound of just like building up tension and not just having like straight up jump scares.
Hmm.
So I really appreciated that. Saw X we've discussed because like you said, this was my favorite horror movie of the year. That I will probably talk about when we talk about surprises. But yeah, this was just it seems like everybody universally has just been like the same. I have not seen anyone who has said like Saw X was bad or like it disappointed them or whatever. Pretty much like the universal consensus, which is so rare, especially in like the film, social media, Twitter sphere, YouTube sphere. It's so rare that you see like unanimity in like movies, especially horror movies, but like it seems to be universal that like Saw X is like A, just really good in its own right, and B, one of the best Saw movies, if not the best in some people's eyes. So yeah, no, I
Yeah,
definitely
and
agree.
of all franchises, they pick Saw to be universal on something.
It really is. It will be studied for generations, I'm sure. Um, But yeah, no, Saw X was really solid. I really dug that. It is my second favorite Saw movie, and that's a franchise overall. That's one of my favorite horror franchises of all time. So that's very high praises for me. It just edged out of my top 10. I believe it's like my 12 or 13. So it was very close. The Killer, yeah. I talked about that. You've talked about that. I'm glad to see that was on your list. It actually has not been as well received as I thought because a lot of people are kind of putting this in like the mid, like 3.5 out of 5 tier. I gave this a 4 out of 5, which is like just getting into the great, label for me is like what I would put like 4 out of 5 movies. But pretty universally, a lot of people seem to have been a lot more negative on this than I was.
So
Then I guess we are.
as as somebody who would not like this film in a past life, I think I know why. So I'm going to argue as if I was past Jacob. It's pretty much a character study with a lot of, I don't know, I guess the easiest way to put it would be thinky points. Like the entire movie is essentially just this inner dialogue of a killer. And to me, I really enjoyed it. I could see how a lot of people just be like, "Oh, this is a drag. I'm tired of him just narrating the entire time." And there's nothing. I thought this was about a killer. There's no action. Like the whole isn't like the first 17 minutes is just him waiting to snipe that guy, and he just is chilling, explaining what it takes to be a killer, and he goes on some rants. And I thoroughly enjoyed him just chilling in a room, but I could see how people wouldn't. But I also think Fincher did that on purpose because he was like, well, when you are sniping somebody, you have to sit and you have to wait. And this job is not for somebody who's impatient. And in the movie terms, it's like 3 or 4 days or whatever it was. So, like, I think he was doing that on purpose. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like there are parts of the movie where the average person would not like it.
That's totally fair. And purposeful or not, the trailer made it seem like it was going to be just like a straightforward action movie. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but like I alluded to when I discussed it, David Fincher has gone on record saying it's kind of like a dark comedy. And I think you can really see it when you watch it with that lens. And I think that's kind of part of
Yep.
it because when you like really watch it, he's kind of an idiot and he's kind of like not good at what he does, even though
It's
he thinks
literally
he is. That's the
Napoleon
funny part.
Dynamite if he was an assassin.
Right. No, he like thinks he's this like deep, edgy, expert hitman, and then he's kind of none of that. Like he kind of sucks and he's just full of himself.
He
So
basically
that's what I
falls
think is so funny about
backwards
it.
into like every kill.
Right. Exactly. But and it just makes it so funny because he's so like deluded that he thinks like he's this like great, deep, mysterious assassin. So that's just yeah, it was like it was like a very complex humor that I personally did not get it the first time. I watched it and thought it was very straight-laced, still liked it a lot. But then one of my coworkers was like, "Well, it's like supposed to be like kind of like a comedy, right?" And I had never thought that before and I saw where Fincher had said that and I rewatched it and like through that lens, I'm like, "Oh my God, like this movie is hilarious." So,
Yeah,
yeah.
the first also, and I don't think this is a spoiler, the fact that every fake name he uses is a famous TV sitcom character, that I loved.
Right, exact I think that just kinda goes to, like I think that's, like, intentional to be like, he probably thinks it's, like, some really clever, like, alias, when really it's just something he ripped off from, like, an old sitcom.
Yeah,
Like, he
that.
thinks it's this, like, mysterious, shadowy alias that he came up with.
Yeah, meanwhile, he's picking famous dads that are actually, now that you say that, he picks a lot of famous sitcom dads that are dunces in and of themselves. So that could even be playing more into what you were just talking about, where he's essentially Napoleon Dynamite, but an assassin.
Right. And then, like you said with the action scene, I loved that action scene because it's like it felt real, like there were consequences. And like even like I believe it's like I think his leg gets like injured and like for the rest of the movie he like limps. Like there's like consequences. It's not like John Wick where he can get like run over by a tank and still, still go
Where
on.
he can fall off like a 20-story building and somehow live.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I appreciated that in this as well. And then Champions, this was one that I wanted to check out, but I just never got around to it. It's one I'm still definitely interested in watching in the future, but I remember I really loved the trailers. I liked the concept, and I just heard nothing but good things. So I definitely wanted to check this out at some point, but I just never got around to seeing it.
Real quick before you move on, for what is it? Kevin Iannucci is the lead guy in Champions on the basketball team. If he's ever in anything else, you gotta help me find out. I swear, it's if this is his first time acting, bravo! Like this guy is amazing. Um, and with the two comedies, I feel like it probably is worth mentioning just in case there are people who are like, oh, I hear the recommendations, I want to go watch. For old dads, it's a lot of generational humor, and to me, I personally enjoy that. I find it funny. They literally have characters that are of my generation and then people who are of my dad's generation, and looking at the differences, and I think that's personally funny. And then for Champions, the humor's not for everybody, but I mean, mentally disabled people, and they're also kind of making fun of themselves in like a lighthearted way, but it's also showing how they like live their life and are real people and whatnot. So it's also a positive movie. So I think it does a really good job of balancing the humor with like giving a positive message. It's solid.
Yeah, that's what the trailers made it seem like. So I definitely will want to seek this one out to get to see it. Okay, so we will get started with my top five, I believe. So my number five, surprisingly to me, maybe to other people, maybe to you if people really know me, but my number five turned out to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So the reason
Surprised.
that this is surprising is I've gone on record, I believe even on this podcast, I am not particularly a James Gunn fan. I think he is a solid director and writer, but just the stories he chooses to tell and his sort of style just typically isn't my thing. Um, the first Guardians of the Galaxy I think is really good. It's definitely in my top half of the MCU, but it's not in my top 10. The second one I really don't like, and it's one of my bottom five in the MCU. And this one cracked my top 10. I think it is the best of the trilogy. It's in my top 10 of the MCU overall, which, as you know, is a franchise in general that I love. And historically, I'd said, oh, if there was one set of characters or like one, sub franchise I'd cut from the MCU, it'd be the Guardians of the Galaxy easily. But then this third one really made me rethink that. This one just impressed me on all levels. This is, an incredible character study. I think this is some of the best character work just in the MCU period, at least within one movie. It really just gives everyone, it closes everyone's arc, not just in this movie, but just these characters overall. Like the main character is actually Rocket, which was an interesting little, change. Rocket has a great arc that closes in this movie about, him finally, you learn more about his backstory, and his arc kind of closes as he learns to finally, he's always been the most emotionally distant from the team, as he finally learns, what does it mean to be a friend? What does it mean to be family? So he sort of has an arc that closes that's done so well. Star-Lord has, I'm not going to spoil it, but Star-Lord has a, arc that brings his whole story to a close. Even people just like Nebula, Drax, Gamora, literally everyone, from when we were first introduced to them in that first movie through all the subsequent movies, their arcs are just wrapped up so nicely here. So some of the best character work in the MCU. It's so emotional. And I think the trailers reflected that. I think that this movie had solid trailers, and then the movie actually lived up to that and more. But yeah, there's definitely some tear jerking moments, some gut wrenching moments, but it just ends on such a powerful, hopeful note. And so, yeah, the writing was incredible. The character work was incredible. The villain, the High Evolutionary, he is easily in my top 10 MCU villains. He is just, it's sort of like pulling from that Heath Ledger Joker school of villains where he doesn't necessarily have a motive that we know of. He doesn't have like a grand scheme. He's just this through and he doesn't have any redemptive qualities. He's just this through and through, just pure evil and pure malice. And he was such a compelling villain. And definitely one of my favorites there. It introduces Adam Warlock, and I thought that he was really good. And yeah, just overall, this movie just genuinely surprised me. It's such great character work, such great story work. And I don't know what kind of pool James Gunn has, apparently a lot, but something that just kind of baffles me in retrospect is how, you know, Marvel tends to bully their directors into like, doing the corporate vision. Like I think like Sam Raimi, he's Sam Raimi. He not only is he a horror icon, but he did the whole Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, one of the most beloved superhero trilogies of all time. And even he fought Disney over Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and Disney won for a lot of the creative decisions in that movie. But somehow James Gunn in all three movies has just had just basically unfiltered creative control. So I don't know why he's the exception. But this movie, I was originally skeptical about James Gunn taking over the DCU because, I hadn't been a fan of his style in his films. But this one sort of really changed my mind and made me think like, okay, he excels at these quirky, broken characters and giving them sort of meaning and purpose and giving them a meaningful arc. And so when I saw this movie and so what he was able to do writing wise and storytelling wise, I was like, okay, I could see him taking over. I'm fine with him taking over the DCU now. So, yeah, all surprise to many, but I have Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 at my number 5.
Yeah, I wasn't even joking earlier. That is a surprise for me because, like you said, I know you don't like, or sorry, you are not as big of a fan of James Gunn as some people, especially Guardians. So that's definitely cool. I remember that we were talking about the fall of the MCU, and even you said, "Hey, Guardians 3 is awesome. It's worth seeing." I didn't see it, but you were highly recommending it after not recommending any of the other movies. So good. That's a sign right there. That's what I'm gonna work off of.
It really is just like an oasis because as an MCU fan, I'm not gonna delude myself. The MCU has clearly dipped in quality since Phase 4 and 5, and so like this is like the one standout where like this feels like a Phase 1 through 3 movie that was just put into kickoff or put into part of Phase 5. But yeah, that was just what was so great about it because I'd been so burnt out on the MCU. They were taking a dip in quality. It followed up Quantum Mania, which was very disappointing, and set the bar really low. But this one really, really shined. So it was a little flicker of hope, and then you think, well, he's just moving over to DC, so we probably won't get a flicker of hope like that again. But who knows?
Are we already on Phase 5?
Yes, Phase 5 kicked off this year with Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania.
Dang, that shows you how out of touch I am. Um. Okay. Moving into my number 5. Like I said, a lot of these are going to be random indie movies that aren't maybe well known, and so my number 5 is The Conference. So this is a Swedish film, and it's a slasher. It's also a comedy, and but it's not like your stereotypical horror comedy. It's funny in that, okay, so I don't know if this is going to make sense. You actually might understand this. So European humor has a way of being able to just exist in life and be funny, if that makes sense. Like it's not, I feel like over here there's a lot of setting up jokes and then hitting punchlines, whereas with a lot of the European TV and movies that I watch, it's very different. They'll like set up something that could actually happen in real life, and then it just becomes funny, if that makes sense. So it's that type of comedy, and the setup is there are a bunch of employees who work for just a random business, and you can insert whatever business you want if you'd like it to be relatable, and they're essentially doing a corporate retreat. This retreat is designed to celebrate a big deal that they've just closed. It's also for team bonding, and they're at this camp. They have to give in their phones because they're doing like a connecting thing, and they're going to be away from technology. So of course that's like the setup. And then I don't know if you've ever imagined being locked in a cabin with your coworkers, but of course There's going to be tension. You're going to get to see a side of your coworkers you've never seen before. And so as relationships are essentially devolving, there's a guy in what I personally felt like was a pretty solid mask, going around and murdering people. And so I put this so high because, as you could probably tell if you've been watching the podcast up to this point, for me personally, I feel like if there's any genre that I am to call my own, it would be the slasher genre. And for me personally, I feel like a lot of the recent slashers haven't necessarily been up to the par that I set. And I don't know if the Conference necessarily hits the bar of some of the classics that I herald really high, but I think it's really close. I think that Patrick Eklund really did a good job with this one. The kills are magnificent. They are all on screen, but they are all tasteful. They're also, I don't want to say realistic, but I feel like there's, for some people who are just like, oh, well, with a lot of slashers, there's just so much gore and I don't want to see it. Like, they're tasteful. When someone gets hit in the head, there's a little bit of blood spatter. It's filmed in a cool way. The cinematography's done well. Also, he is clearly a human. It's not like Scream where every 5 seconds Ghostface falls over and it's like made to be like, to me, I know they tried to make Ghostface realistic, but to me it kind of feels like you're watching like a comedy skit where a lot of the times he just trips over himself for no reason. With this, the guy is clearly a realistic slasher who's hunting you. When they fight back, he gets hurt, but then he keeps coming and he'll like find a way to then overpower the person who just overpowered him. And like, I don't know, it gives a more realistic feel. And then the fact that there's all of this horror tension that can just occasionally be enlightened by, I don't know, an old lady cursing or something. Like, it's just those little funny moments. And so just as a whole, with the fact that they kind of hit all the bars for me. Of course, it's a good slasher. The kills were good. I thought it was an appropriate amount of gore. I like that they showed stuff to us. I give respect for the special effects. It was all done with their hands. The comedy aspect, I didn't feel like it was overbearing. I actually thought it was pretty funny. Actually, ironically, the weakest part was probably the story going on behind the scenes, because it turns out that deal that they closed, they didn't actually close. So of course there has to be a little bit of something to start the initial tension. But yeah, this was just a really solid one. I had no idea what it was, and I just felt like watching a horror movie one day, and it really surprised me. Especially after watching another 2023 slasher that had the makings to be awesome, but was terrible. And so, yeah, this one was really good. I liked it. My number 5, The Conference.
I had never seen, or well, first of all, I'd never heard of this one, so I did not see it. What did you see this on? Just curious.
Netflix.
Okay, interesting. You said this was European, like Swedish or something?
Yeah, it's Swedish. It's dubbed on Netflix, so you don't have to worry about subtitles or anything.
I feel like dubbing's worse, to be completely honest.
Yeah, I have to be in the mood for subtitles. I'll watch them, but if they dub a movie, I'm like all in. I have no problem if their mouths are saying something completely different.
Yeah, see, I'm just part of that like Gen Z millennial trend apparently, where I watch everything with subtitles now. Like even stuff I can hear. I don't know.
Oh, you're one of those. No, I'm just kidding. I don't care
Yeah,
if you are. But
one of those.
you're all right. That seems to be a trend. I don't like it. I've noticed that that's actually a thing even on dating sites. It'll say swipe left if you don't use subtitles, which I think is funny.
Yeah, I am definitely one of those people. But yeah, I had not heard of this one. It wasn't even on my radar, but it definitely sounds intriguing enough, especially with it being your number 5.
Yeah, this one was. It was definitely. I actually would be curious because I think you've been a little higher on the more modern slasher genre that it's kind of evolved into than I am. So I'd be curious what you think of this one.
Yeah, I tend to favor newer slashers to older slashers, which I think is like a somewhat of a difference between us. But yeah, no, it would be definitely be interesting to check this one out. Okay. So my number four is going to be Gran Turismo. So this is a Neil Blomkamp movie, which is surprising because it's not a gritty dystopian anti-capitalist movie set in South Africa. But this is from Neil Blomkamp, who's sort of making a little bit of a return after a long hiatus. He had some horror movie come out either last year or 2021, but like no one saw it. So this was really his like coming back moment. But yeah, so this is a sort of a video game adaptation. Now, to be completely honest, I was so out of the loop, I didn't even know Gran Turismo was a video game. But I have since learned that it was like a realistic driving simulator. I have educated myself now. Um, but yeah, it is based on the video game, and so, but it's not quite a video game movie. It's actually kind of an interesting concept because it's based on a true story that itself was sort of based on Gran Turismo, so the whole central premise was basically, at this point, I don't know exactly what year the movie picks up in. It's sometime in the 2010s or like late 2000s. Like Nissan, the company had really like their racing division had really taken a hit, and they needed some like big gimmick or like something to like get them back in the conversation in the racing world. So they sort of decide that they're going to do this like publicity stunt basically and take the best Gran Turismo players, which is like an interactive driving simulator, and they're going to take the best player and make them a real, sign them as like a real Nissan sports car or race car driver. And so it sort of follows this kid who is a huge Gran Turismo fan, and he lives in England, and his dad wants him to basically just be like a manual laborer like he is, and he sort of feels like an outcast, and like his older brother or his and I actually think it might be his younger brother, which makes it even worse, is like much more successful than him because it seems like he just stays inside and plays video games all day, and he dreams of being a race car driver, but his dad's like, that's never going to happen. You got to be realistic, you got to get a real job like me. But of course, in classic movie fashion, he wins the contest, so he gets to become a real race car driver. And this one is just such a compelling story. Like on the surface, just being based on a true story, uh it's certain inherent intrigue where you're like, this is such like a crazy story and this actually happened, like that sort of feeling. So it's just interesting to see how that sort of unfolds, how someone goes from like using video game skills to a real life skills and then turning out to be really good at it. But other than that, it really is just like a lot of people have said like, oh, it's just sort of like full of like sports movie tropes. I personally don't watch like any sports movies, so these tropes seemed very new to me. And so it's just about pushing your limits, about testing yourself, about striving to be the best at all costs and proving everyone else wrong, because you know that you got it in you. Maybe no one else believes that you've got it in you, but you do. So it's got all of those things, and it's done really well. The main character is played by an actor. I'm going to butcher his last name, but it's Archie Madekwe, I believe is how it's pronounced. He is incredible. Well, he is in Midsommar, but he's a very small part of Midsommar. This was really the first time I actually got to see him like, really like shine in like a main role, and he's incredible. David Harbour is in it as sort of like his like racing coach, mentor sort of person. He is great as well, especially in that role. Orlando Bloom is in it. Jimon Hansu was in it. Just great actors, great performances, and Neil Blomkamp really came to play with his direction here because I thought the racing sequences were directed beautifully. It really gives like a real sense of speed where you actually feel like you get a sense of like how fast these cars are really going. It had plenty of cool shots and great cinematography, and it also does this really interesting thing. And this isn't really like a spoiler or anything, but when he races, it's kind of hard to describe without actually seeing it. When he races, it like deconstructs the car and like makes it look like the actor is like sitting in his chair at home playing the video game while like the race is going on. And it just really sort of like connects that sort of like interface of him playing the video game and him racing in real life really well. It was just like a creative thing that Neil Blomkamp decided to do visually. But yeah, this was really good. I want to see more of this actor Archie Madekwe, and I think Neil Blomkamp might be, he might be back. Who knows? He had like a hot streak. He had a hot streak in the 2010s and then kind of disappeared. So this one had a lot of buzz and made a decent amount of money. So we shall see what he has in his future. But yeah, my number 4 is Gran Turismo.
Yeah, another one I didn't see. This one isn't necessarily on my list, but I have seen it on the front of like Hulu or Prime, whatever it's on. And so I think my dad asked what it was and I filled him in. I am familiar with the story. I did know this was a video game. When I first saw the trailer, I actually thought they really were just going to do like a Need for Speed kind of adaptation. So I thought it was cool that they picked this story to go with. I like David Harbour. That's about all I can add.
I mean, he was great, so that's about all you need to know.
But this one I could see being one that I would be more likely to check out eventually. Yeah, I'm actually glad you liked it. Although didn't you also, I'm sorry, I know it doesn't technically have to do with the cars. If I remember correctly, that's the thing people always say, but didn't you like Ford versus Ferrari? Or Ford, was that what it was called?
So yeah, no, Ford v Ferrari was my favorite movie of 2019. I really loved that film, and a lot that I could say about this film, I think was honestly done better in Ford v Ferrari, but this one was still great. But Ford v Ferrari is one of my top films of the past couple years.
Okay. So moving on to my number 4, sticking with my theme. This one is No One Will Save You. Another one, I had no idea what this was. I saw one trailer like a week before it came out. The trailer didn't even win me over. It was just horror, and I felt like watching a horror movie. It like nothing else had come out that weekend, if I remember correctly, or at least that I wanted to see. So I booted this one up, gave it a shot, and wow, was I surprised. This movie was absolutely amazing. This movie stars Caitlin Dever, who is a big child actress. Like, she was on Justified, she was on Last Man Standing. I feel like she got more praise for when she did Booksmart. Sorry, I always forget what the name of that one's called. If I remember correctly, she like wrote and directed that movie, so that was like her, like, I don't want to say break into Hollywood, but break out of kid acting, I guess we'll say. But this one was awesome. It fully follows Caitlin Dever's character. And the very interesting thing about this is there's like no words in the movie. I really want to rewatch this and like do a count. I swear to God, there's maybe 2 words said in the entire. She gives like one sentence at the end. It's like 4 words, which is not a bad thing. I think we've talked about before where with bottle stories, especially ones that have very few actors, they take place in one space. It really forces the actor, the director, the writer to show their real talent, because it has to be a movie that keeps somebody's attention in this one area that could get boring. And so this one, I feel like it would need to be put somewhere as like a something to study for bottle stories in the future. Is it the best one ever? I don't know. Off the top of my head, I would probably have to look into that before I make that saying. But just wow. So this is an alien movie for those who are curious. Essentially, she lives in her house by herself. There was an incident that happened due to said trauma. She just doesn't speak. But to be fair, nobody else in the movie speaks, so take that as you will. And aliens invade. But it's not like it's not at all what you would think. And I'm trying to illustrate how good this was without spoiling stuff, because I don't like alien movies, but I liked this movie. The creature design was awesome. The way that the even though it's a horror movie, I would almost say that the suspense and like the tension was what really like especially Brian Duffield is who did this, and if I when I was looking at it, it looks like he also did Underwater and The Babysitter. um so his the way he built the tension from beginning to end was just magnificent, because like at the beginning, you're kind of giving the movie a shot, you're like, oh, I'm getting used to the story, I wonder what's going on, da 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 da, and then all of a sudden a thing happens. Okay, this is kind of it's getting there. I get it. I get what's going on. Nothing too crazy. Nothing world breaking. And then all of a sudden the tension ends, and it's like, okay, interesting. I assumed the whole movie was going to be this. What happens next? And then all of a sudden it's just like bam, 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 and they throw it at you, but in like the best way possible. And I don't. I didn't see Underwater. I don't remember if people said that was good or not. But what he does with this movie, the way that he just the emotional roller coaster that you go on, especially in the climax, like I just props, I guess, respect. I don't know. I can't really speak highly enough on this movie. It was just really I'm looking very forward to rewatching it eventually. But yeah, as of right now, of course, I've only seen it once. I really liked it. It was almost my favorite horror movie of 2023.
No, this was one that was definitely on my radar that I guess I should say it was on my radar and then it slipped off because I never ended up checking this one out. It's on Hulu, right?
Yeah, it's a Hulu original. Um, it's really good. And
Okay.
like I said, the thing to keep in mind that's the craziest about this, I swear, like 4 words are used the entire movie. It's not a silent film or anything like that. He just it's like everybody always says, show don't tell. He shows the entire time, and it's awesome.
Are those are those 4 or 5 words? No one will save you.
No, I wish that
Okay,
actually.
all right. Yeah, no, this was one that I'd heard so many good things about, like things that you had said, pretty much everyone was saying that it's like just such a good movie, such a good bottle story. Caitlin Deaver does great. I wasn't the biggest fan of Booksmart, but I thought Caitlin Deaver was great in that. And so she's definitely one of those like up and coming actresses. But yeah, no, I'd heard nothing but great things about this, and I do like alien movies, and as from a horror perspective, I've alluded before that Home Invasion particularly is like a red. I don't know it's not like a trigger because I still watch them. It's like one of those like hot button, topics in horror movies that definitely gets me really scared. So combining those two and sort of like an alien home invasion movie. I this is one that I would definitely I feel like have the most probability of checking out, especially because it's on Hulu. But it did slip through my 2023 cracks, unfortunately.
It's going off of that. I think it also does a great job of allowing you to really feel like you are Caitlin, or at least you're thinking the entire time, "Oh my God, what would I do in this situation?" And I love those kinds of movies. Like it almost gives me Strangers vibes, where you're on the edge of your seat the entire time. You're wondering what they're going to do next. How are they going to get out of this? And it's a long movie, but also I feel like you kind of blink and it's done, which is like my favorite kind of movie, because then like the runtime was good. They thought through the pacing well, and so yeah, it was just a solid ride.
Yeah. No, I definitely will probably check this out at some point. Okay. So my number three is for me easily the biggest surprise of the year because I didn't even know this movie existed until it had already come out. So my number three is Godzilla minus one. So if you know me, I am a huge Godzilla fan. When I was growing up, I watched all the Japanese ones just incessantly. And then now I'm a big fan of the MonsterVerse and these American Godzilla films. And I've even said, publicly that the 1998 Roland Emmerich Godzilla is very underrated and quite enjoyable. So just overall, through and through, a Godzilla fan. And it had been a while since I saw a Japanese Godzilla film. I unfortunately did not get to check out Shin Godzilla, which was a big one that came out in 2016 that I'm still hoping to maybe rewatch in the future. Or sorry, excuse me, watch in the future. But Godzilla minus one kind of came out of nowhere, and that seems to be most people's sentiments about the movie. I didn't even know that there was, because in Japan, they make Godzilla movies all the time, but not all of them come over to the US. And so I didn't even know that there was one coming to the US until I had seen movie YouTubers that I follow talk about it, like reviewing it, and I didn't even know it had come out. So I went and saw it, and this movie is like incredible. Like, this is one of those movies where it's very much a Godzilla movie, but you could take Godzilla out of it and it would still be in my top 10 of the year easily. And Godzilla is just like the icing on the cake. And it's not like there's not a lot of Godzilla in it. He's very much a motivating force in this, but you just really don't need him for it to not be an enjoyable movie. Essentially, this is set in post-war Japan. Our main character is this is I don't want to get into like too many spoilers, but this is kind of just like very basic concept. He's a kamikaze pilot who, if you're doing the math, he's alive. So he didn't fulfill his duty. And as a kamikaze pilot who didn't, do the deed, he is basically viewed as like a coward. And sort of he goes through, hell in the war in World War II. And he comes back and he basically feels like a coward who's lost his honor. And so Japan, he is, personally devastated from his experiences in the war, and Japan is devastated, not just, from the bombings on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but just Japan in general. Inflation, no money, places have been firebombed to hell. Japan was just such a destitute place immediately after the war, and they're trying to rebuild. And to add, insult to injury, Godzilla shows up. And so it's sort of using, Godzilla's always been a metaphor, at least originally, for atomic weapons, mankind unleashing this like primal force of destruction. And this, they sort of like pivot from that, and they just make Godzilla represent, you know, sort of just the general devastation that like a nation feels, during and after a war, and sort of how that can affect like a country and like a people as a whole. And so, Japan, and it's called Godzilla minus one because the director said it's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek way of like Japan started at minus one. They weren't at zero, they were at minus one. Godzilla kicked them while they were down. And so it uses Godzilla as this metaphor for just war in general rearing its ugly head. And so it's just such a compelling character story because our main character, and I'm not going to bother with actors' names because I would definitely butcher the pronunciations, but our main character is just, he's disgraced, he feels like he dishonored, and so this his like redemption is going to be you know, not necessarily, I'm not going to spoil anything, but not necessarily sacrificing his life, but doing something to, help Japan defeat Godzilla and help, like, defend his nation rightly, at least in his mind. I'm not condoning kamikazing. But yeah, so it's just a great character study. It's very thematically rich. It has incredible Godzilla moments. The Godzilla looks great in this. It's sort of redesigned, like his spikes are spikier. He's a little bit more agile. He's a little bit thinner. Godzilla's typically a thick boy, very bottom heavy. And so in this one, he's like a little bit more dinosaur-esque where he can be more agile. He's a little bit more nimble. He's a little bit thinner. And they do a cool thing with his atomic breath where basically he shoots out the beam and whatever it hits detonates in a nuclear explosion. So it's like the beam itself isn't necessarily the atomic part. It like combusts anything that it touches. So just like these cool little details to add to like the Godzilla mythos. But beyond that, just as like a movie about like the devastation of post-war Japan and someone dealing with sort of like survivor's guilt. Like, why didn't I go above and beyond and kill myself like my people wanted me to? Why didn't I serve my country the way I originally thought I would? So it's like, yeah, it just is sort of just about bringing yourself together after a war, and it sort of investigates that on an individual level with our main character and just a national level with Japan in general. So this one came out of absolutely nowhere, but it completely immediately moved up to my number 3. And so this is a movie that I would recommend everyone to go see, whether you like Godzilla or not. I promise it's an incredible film.
Yeah, I had this one on my list. That's why I laughed at the beginning. I'm glad you got to see it because I wholeheartedly wanted to recommend this to you. I just didn't get a chance to watch it. I was seeing I had seen a bunch of the trailers leading up to it, and then I saw that people were raving about how good this was. I saw some people say it was even the best Godzilla movie they've ever seen. So that was high praise, I would assume. Obviously, you've seen it, and you're more of the Godzilla fan. So maybe,
It really
but
is, Godzilla 2014 and this one for me are pretty neck and neck, which is saying a lot because I love Godzilla 2014. So I would definitely put it up there.
I need to watch Godzilla 2014, and I think part of it's because I saw it when I was 15. So, you know, uh, bias. I was younger. I didn't really like movies like that. I don't know. I need to rewatch a lot of movies from high school where I had a very different mindset on stuff. But you keep talking about how awesome that movie was, so I need to rewatch it. I don't remember liking it as much as you did.
For sure.
Um,
And also check out -1 whenever you can.
yeah, that one's towards the top of my 2023 watch list. Um, the one I have at number 3, I know 100% you're gonna disagree with. I think I would not be surprised if this is on one of your disappointments. Although I don't think you thought very highly of this going in, so maybe not. My number 3 is John Wick 4. I have not rewatched this yet. I know I need to, but just going off of when I saw it in theaters, for me personally, I put this at number 2 behind the first one. I really did like it. I know you did not. I thought that there were a lot of very quotable lines, which I definitely like in action movies. I feel like that's something that stems from just the classic ones. Like in action movies, there has to be quotable lines. I thought a lot of the acting performance was really good. Of course, a movie that features actors such as Marco Zaror. Of course, you got Donnie Yen. I almost butchered that. Hiroyuki Sanada. Like they really went above and beyond to get a lot of the great martial arts people to bring in for this final showing, which I very much appreciated. I know one of the reasons why you are not a big fan of John Wick after part 1, and this is completely justified, is that in the first movie, there's the allure of this secret society, and even I would argue by number 2, all of a sudden, it's just like everybody in the world is a part of the secret society, or they just ignore gunfire in public places. And so I totally get it. By the fourth one, I don't care anymore. At this point, it's basically a B action movie with a triple A budget. And so the action sequences for me, I thought were done really well. Scott Adkins' scene was awesome. I was very happy with the fight scene in the rain. I always forget the name of it, but that famous circle that's in Paris, I think is where that is, where when they did the fight scene with the cars, I really appreciated that. I know another thing that you weren't the biggest fan of was them doing another dog person since they had just done Halle Berry, and I completely agree. He was my least favorite part of the movie. The only part I did like is that they kind of finally do a win for the dogs, if that makes sense. I feel like Halle Berry's character just kind of comes and goes, and we get the cool dog sequence, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's like the win that we needed. Like, I feel like what Chad was trying to do with this one was kind of not just wrap up Wick's character, but also, since it started with the dog, like have this dog that kind of goes through some turmoil and then have him get his revenge as well. I don't know if you got that read, but I felt like they were pseudo trying to give us victory for the dog as well. And yeah, the having been accustomed to the way that 2 and 3 work, and the fact that these assassins who very clearly want to kill each other but are also friendly, and they have this like weird honor that hasn't been seen for thousands of years is definitely interesting. But also, like I said, I'm used to it at this point. I'm just accepting that John Wick can't die. Realism's out the door. I'm going in treating it like it's a B direct to DVD martial arts movie I'm about to watch, but with a AAA budget. And so I think because I had a different mindset going in, I liked it a lot more than you did. I think if I was to go back, I would definitely choose to watch this over 2 and 3. 1 is still the best by far. That one's just such a solid movie, as I feel like you can say with a lot of franchises, where the first one is, of course, the most solid. That's why it spawns the franchise. But yeah, I like this one. I like the fact that Donnie Yen was blind, and I really feel like a lot of the stuff that they did was purely so that way they could create cool action sequences. Um, yeah, I think we've said this when we were talking about 2 and 3. John Wick is just the Saw for action franchises, where Chad Stahelski kept saying, "How can I make a cooler action scene? I no longer care about story."
Yeah, so this is definitely one of my biggest disappointments of the year. And I don't want to just like crap on it after you just hyped it up because I'm glad that you liked it. This is definitely movies like this whole franchise are definitely movies made more for you than me. But you kind of just hit the nail on the head about things I didn't like. It just gets so convoluted. Like you know, just I just the whole Paris circle thing. I'm just like they're just blatantly open firing in the middle of crowded traffic for like 20 minutes and not a single there's no police, there's no anything, no one really stops. It's like the cars just keep going like this is normal, and there's just people just open firing machine guns for 20 minutes in one of the most traffic congested places. I don't know. Just stuff like that. And they just keep adding to the lore in the most convoluted ways. It's like every movie has just been like, oh, you know, the guy we previously said was in charge? Well, actually, there's this guy in insert exotic European country who's really in charge. And this is like the fourth time where it's like, no, this guy's really in charge. And I think I had joked to you after I saw it. It's like they're gonna make number 5, and it's like this is the Pope Postmaster Surgeon General Chief of Staff of the assassins, and he's really in charge, and he's in Bulgarian. Everyone else is just a pawn for him. And yeah, I don't know. It just and then the action scenes just seemed monotonous to me. Like I got really annoyed at the staircase scene because I'm like, just get up the fucking steps. Like
When he makes it the whole way up, then falls the whole way back down, and it's like, dang it.
and I was like, now I know why this movie is like 2 hours and 45 minutes. Um, yeah, there's just that, and like I will say I think three actually might 3 and 1 are pretty closely tied. For me, what I liked about 3 was it was a lot of the craziness, but I found it to be at least more like entertaining from the perspective of like I thought that the kills were the most creative in 3. Like, they're in the library and he's using books, or he's here and he's using some cool knife or
I
some
love the
like
horse
when they're in like
sequence.
right, or like he's on a horse, that's cool. Or like it introduced Halle Berry with the dogs and using dogs as a weapon. And then there's like that fight in the museum where they're pulling out all these old weapons. Like that was cool.
Yeah,
And
that one's
this one
very cool.
it really was just gun fu. Like it really was. There wasn't anything creative. They weren't really using the environment. They weren't really using, the scenery. It really was just gun fu.
Yeah, I
So
can completely agree with that. I think that, and this is where it's interesting, going off of what you just said. So number 3 was the most frustrating for me, and here's why. I 100% agree that of all 4 movies, the third one has the most creative kills. But for me, that was really the only part I liked. When you were talking about it getting so convoluted, when he leaves, then comes back, then goes to the desert, there's a finger, and then blah 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 blah. Like that one, like the story, the at least 2 kind of had a story. In 3, I feel like is where the story completely went off the rails. And also, I have gone on record with you with this. I'm going on YouTube right now. The Adjudicator is one of the most hated characters in movie history for me personally, and I am still so pissed that she did not die in the 4th movie. The fact that we just know that she's gonna just live and that there's not it's done like unless they do John Wick 8 and bring her back. And because spoiler alert for those who don't know, this movie teases spin-offs, and so I'm assuming there will be a spin-off trilogy, assuming nothing happens to Donnie Yen, of course. And I don't know. Hopefully the adjudicator dies at some point, but I whenever I rewatch John Wick 3, I just want to watch the opening and then fast forward to the other fight scenes cuz the story, that one is a story I cannot get behind. It's so crazy. But also, when you were talking about the how convoluted this gets, I can tell that you're not an 80s action movie fan because that's all of them in a nutshell. It's just, oh, I hate to do this because I love the franchise so much. In the first Die Hard, we have Hans. And then in the third one, it's his brother. Ooh. And then later on, there's references of other family members. And it's just like, okay, how many people are going to try and come kill John McClane at this point? And so, like, I totally get it, I promise. But like you said, I think I'm slightly more into those kinds of things than you are because I don't mind that somebody's secret nephew twice removed wants to kill you because of what you did to their uncle grandpa.
I think the last thing I'll say is 3 was marketed as like the end. Like, okay, we're doing a
Yes.
trilogy. John Wick's story is going to wrap up. And then they leave it inconclusive. And then
And I
they're
hated
like,
it.
JK, like JK, we're making a fourth one. This one's also inconclusive. They refuse to actually show us a dead body. It's a movie. If there's not a physical decapitated corpse inside, a coffin, or the Michael Myers style, they throw him in a whatever that thing
Wood
is, not a
chipper or
wood
whatever it
chipper.
was.
Yeah, it was like a or the thing that crushes
Oh, the
cars.
car version of a wood chipper. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, like unless you show me that, they're not. And you could tell they purposefully did it too. They were just like, "Oh,
Oh,
JK, we might do a 5."
so Chad literally said it in an interview. As of right now, and the spoiler alert for those who want to fast forward, he is dead. John Wick is dead as it stands right now. They're going to do the spin-offs. We're going to get Ballerina. Hopefully Donnie Yen comes back. We'll get Stick, whatever it is. Um, but they said if they ever get, it's funny too when he says this because this is like the classic line, but it doesn't work for John Wick. He said, if we ever think of a story that's worthy enough to bring Wick back from the dead, we will. And I immediately laughed because I feel like the last 3 movies haven't had stories that were good enough to warrant. So
If
the
we ever need more money fast, we'll
exactly
do a John Wick 5.
when Keanu Reeves has gray hair, we're gonna bring him back for Old Man Wick. But yeah, that's what's so funny that because it's gonna be he's gonna come back and we're gonna find out that someone was hunting him and they had to show Winston at his grave, but it was a fake grave, and they'll find some way around it. So you're 100% right. But as it stands right now, he is technically dead, confirmed by the director. He just said that in the future, if he needs to, he will work in a way to essentially retcon what happened. And you haven't watched the Fast and Furious movies. Han 100% dies, but of course in Fast 9, if I remember correctly, he just is back from the dead because they wanted him to be, and they completely retconned like the most famous scene in the franchise and made it work in this extremely convoluted way. So like, there you go.
Well, you see, when Mrs. John Wick went to go buy that puppy, there was this other guy that wanted that puppy first. And so he's been training this whole time and joining this assassins organization. And he's going to come back for be the big bad of John Wick Chapter 5.
So what you're saying is they're going to stick John Wick's body in a Lazarus pit, and then he's going to take over as the new demon, the new head of the.
Or they'll merge RoboCop with John Wick and put him inside of a robotic body.
I still, back when Fast and Furious and John Wick 3 came out, I think it was Fast 8. There was the whole thing about, or it could have been Fast 9, excuse me. There was the whole thing about if John Wick threatened Vin Diesel's family and Vin Diesel threatened John Wick's dog, who would win? I would love to see that crossover because it's hilarious. There was a whole 50-50 split on the internet. No one could decide who would win.
Here's your John Wick 5, everyone. I don't know. The very actual last thing I'll say, like, who is not an assassin in this universe is basically my question. There's
It
just
is funny.
hundreds of people, like hundreds of of just like pedestrians living normal lives will just snap into assassin mode. And it's like, is this world just like secretly all assassins, but like they just don't know that other people are assassins? Like that'd
So
be like such a funny moment.
obviously, this, I don't think Chad's going that deep, but the way that I took it very early on was that he was making commentary on how uh, 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 cautious isn't the right word, but you know how there are a lot of people in society who just believe that like your neighbor's a spy and he worked and the government's in the other house and whatever. I assumed he was making some sort of commentary on potential paranoia. That's kind of how I took it. Where imagine, like you said, there's a group of 20 people, 19 of them are all spies, and there's one guy left over. Like, wait, what? Was I supposed to be a spy?
That's how I feel watching these movies because it seems like there's just hundreds of people in any major city that are just spies secretly.
Yeah. Next time that you are in it in city, just remember everybody who's walking past you is secretly a spy.
Who's cleaning up these bodies? Like,
Oh,
the more I'm
that's
just
funny.
thinking about it, the more it just
The,
falls apart. Like, take the Paris thing, like in that circle. Never mind that no one calls the cops after they're just like open firing, but like he leaves like 80 bodies in like a 100 square foot radius in this highly trafficked area. Like, who picks them up? Do they have like a cleanup
well,
crew or
yeah.
like what?
In the first movie, they established that there's a cleanup crew and they own the police, and then in the second movie, they established that they own the government. So no one will ever know about what happened in Paris, is what you are led to believe. Because the
Okay,
government
I
won't
did.
let the media put it out, and the cops will make sure that that everything's okay, and the cleanup crew will clean up the bodies.
Okay, I will give you in the first one they do allude to that, but do they own the police in Paris too? I guess. Of course they
I'm
do.
going
Why
to.
not?
I would say at this point they own everything. That like you said, everybody is a part of this organization, and honestly, I'm amazed they all don't just kill each other all at once. Like I feel like this should be a post-apocalyptic movie of the last assassin.
It's almost like if everyone's an assassin, who is paying people to assassinate other people?
Yeah,
You know? Like
I
who
hadn't
they
even
never
thought of it.
address that. Like it's always the assassins going rogue or going after other assassins. They've like never established like who is paying these assassins to like assassinate people.
And it's funny too because even the real contracts they've talked about were all mob hits of the assassins going after other organized crime people who then we find out later are connected to the group of assassins anyway. So like like you said, honestly, they all just keep killing each other.
Right, like why does this industry exist to just kill itself? Like they don't establish that there's like outside people hiring these people to do a service to another outside person. Like how do they make
Oh my
money
god.
if
I
it's
never
all just like
it's
cycling between itself?
Yeah, that's all the gold. They're just, I guess if you're really good at killing the other assassins, you just get more gold coins.
It's just the more I'm thinking about it, the more this entire universe is just falling apart.
But see, the point of it is that you're supposed to not think and you're just supposed to sit
Right.
down and have some fun and but honestly, this was a funny conversation. You raised some things I had not thought about. That's actually hilarious. They have not established that they kill people other than other contractual assassins.
Right. Exactly. So, long story short, don't be cruel to animals. That's the whole point of this franchise.
Yep.
Um, okay. Rant over about the John Wick franchise. I do enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate it, but I do enjoy these movies from time to time. They just sort of scratch that action movie itch.
Definitely. They make us all want to become assassins.
Yes. Okay. So speaking of action movies, of a different type at least, my number two is almost forgot what list we were doing. Just got so sidetracked by John Wick talk. My number two is Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part One.
I am
They have since
surprised.
dropped. That is not number one.
Yeah, I figured this would be number one.
A very strong number two. They have since
Okay.
dropped the part one original. I mean, this is a two-part story. The second one's coming out in 2025. It was supposed to be Dead Reckoning Part One and Part Two. Apparently, they're naming the what will be the eighth movie something different. So it's just going to be called Dead Reckoning, and then the sequel will be called something else. But they will be one story split over
They're
two
finishing with
parts.
the eighth movie, right? That's the last of Mission Impossible.
Allegedly. And I think it might actually be. They're at least saying it's wrapping up the Ethan Hunt story. So I think Tom Cruise might be done. But
Okay.
there's still a lot in that universe that I feel like they could do like a Paramount Plus show or something.
Okay.
Anyway, so Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I Mission Impossible is one of my favorite movie franchises of all time, if not my favorite. I love these movies, and this is my favorite of that franchise. I think this does everything that I love about the franchise just to a better degree. The story is just super captivating. I think it's all about AI, which is such a hot topic right now and one that I'm particularly interested in. The villain is this AI, and they really play well with that idea where basically the AI, it's sort of like commenting on the sort of like postmodernist, leaning of our reality now, where like, how do we determine what's true and what's not? Because this AI, essentially, that they call the entity, essentially what it can do is it can go into the internet or go into any digital device it can access and it can change things. So it's sort of like, imagine like, oh, you want to know when George Washington was born. Okay, so you go online, Wikipedia. Imagine if consistently every source on the internet was consistently wrong to the same wrong information. It's sort of like how would you be able to determine what's true and what's not? And so they really play very creatively with this AI villain. And it's also one of the things that personally makes me terrified of AI, where it's like it predicts your every move. Like it plays every situation out to like the finest like it knows exactly where a bullet is going to fire from a henchman's gun in the middle of an altercation because it's just played everything out like mathematically. So it's like, how do you defeat something that knows what you're going to do before you even know what you're going to do? So it does that really well. Of course, Tom Cruise is great, back to doing just crazy stunts again. This time he motorcycles off of a cliff, quite literally. And yeah, he's just delivering, to the people what we want, which is to see him attempt to kill himself. And so, Isai Morales is in this as the human villain who's sort of like the henchman of the entity. I know him as Deathstroke from Titans, and I thought he was quite good in that, but he's normally a TV actor. Like I believe he was one of the main roles in Burn Notice, which is a show I haven't seen, but it seems like his filmography is mostly TV. And so this is like one of his big like first movie roles, and I thought he was great as a villain, and as a TV actor, I thought he really held his own against these big movie stars and dealing with like this big movie budget and stuff. Haley Atwell is in it, and she's a great addition as well. It sort of gives us this inside look into like how the IMF really operates, like really from like a governmental perspective. Um, and yeah, just as a classic Mission Impossible movie, they give us a lot of practical stunts. They literally drove a train off a cliff instead of CGIing it because they wanted it to look real. They actually fought on Tom Cruise and Isai Morales actually fought on top of a moving train that was going like 60 miles an hour. So they, a lot of great practical stunts, great practical action, which is what we come to this franchise for. Really dug the villain. And what I appreciated about it is it's definitely a part one where the story isn't quite finished, but it wraps up its own story. So it like wraps up its own objective without, or with still, there's still more to do, but it wraps up its story. So it still very much can stand alone while alluding that more still needs to be done down the road. So it's not like a part one that just kind of like cuts off directly in the middle, like it feels incomplete. It still very much feels complete. You just know that there's more to go, sort of like an Infinity War Endgame situation. So I just appreciated that about this, but yeah, it's also a lot more serious and darker in tone. the Mission Impossible franchise, especially like Ghost Protocol, gets a little like campy, a little bit campy, a little bit more of the fun, the quipping, the hijinks, the whatever. This is very much not that. From the very beginning, it sets the tone very well, and it's a different tone, and it's a tone I really appreciated, where you just can tell this is a darker movie. This is serious, and they're not doing little heists to steal something to stop someone doing something. They know, like, literally our reality is at stake, and so this is serious. This is big. This is the biggest thing we faced before, and so they take it very seriously. So Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, I guess no part one. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. That's just new to me because I am so used to saying part one. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, my number two, and my favorite Mission Impossible movie.
Yep, this is another one that I have on the list. As you know, earlier this year, I made it I made a concerted effort to watch 1 through 6 because I had never seen the Mission Impossible movies. So now I have, and I did like them. I can see why you like the franchise, and so I will eventually watch 7. But for now, you will just have to settle for me having finally seen 1 through 6. Woo! Also, I really like Henry Cavill in 6, so I forget if you said this. Do you find Morales to be good, better, or equal to Cavill's villain in 6?
I think equal for sure. Cavill played a little bit more of a complex role. Morales is definitely more of like a sinister figure from the start, where
Okay.
he just gives off this villainous sort of devilish bent on like his dialogue and how he conducts himself. It's very like old school villainous, and I feel like it's like a throwback to like maybe even like the original Mission Impossible show from the 60s, but that sort of like 60s spy genre where the villains just seem villainous, for lack of a better word. You know what I'm talking about? They just like
Yeah.
exude devilishness and sinister stuff. So yeah, I put him at probably on par, but it was a different sort of role.
Okay. Cool. Well, moving into my number 2, this is one I know you've seen, and I would not have seen if it wasn't for you. This is Cobweb. The reason why I said that no one will save you, excuse me, would be able to. What was almost my favorite horror movie is because Cobweb exists. If I remember correctly, this is the one that I did put as my favorite horror movie of 2023. This one was just awesome. I am so glad you recommended it. I knew nothing about it, and I think that completely works in its favor. I think that Anthony Starr and Lizzie Kaplan are awesome in this role, or in their roles, excuse me. This is, if I remember correctly, you said that the point of this movie was that it was to be a horror seen through a child's eyes, and I think that really works well. Also love the creature design. Very, very creepy. I think this movie works really well in the fact that, so like I said earlier, I'm not really a big paranormal person, and they get you more on the suspense than they do on utilizing like those classic paranormal tropes. When I watched it, there was only really one sequence where he's kind of having a nightmare where there's actual like paranormal stuff happening, and I actually was okay with it in that small of a dose. But the other stuff is just character development, building the story. You kind of have the suspense, what's going to happen, and then by the time it hits the final act, I think it's delivered perfectly. Kind of like I said with The Conference, the kills are tasteful. The cinematography is awesome. This is one where whoever had the vision for how to orchestrate, especially that ending, I think did a great job. Like I said, the creature design is cool, and I loved the way that they used said design. I am assuming this, but I think that they probably designed some of the stuff based off what they wanted the creature to do, and I think that worked really well. If they designed the creature, then designed the way that they were going to have it work, then even more props to them because they were very creative with it. But yeah, this one's very solid. I have not rewatched it yet, and I'm curious if it still holds up knowing the ending, but I have a feeling it will. This was another one that was kind of like a really fun ride while you're watching it, but also like a blink and it's over, which, like I said before, is my favorite kind of movie. It means the pacing was done well, it doesn't drag, and so yeah, just I kind of touched on this a bunch in a previous podcast, so I won't drill too hard, but just a really solid movie, very under the radar. Like I said, I would not have known if you had not told me about it, but I'm very glad you did.
Yeah, this was definitely one of my biggest surprises of the year and one of my favorite horror movies of the year. Yeah, I just there was so much to appreciate. It was, one of these very small budget, almost like a bottle film. Not quite. I mean, there's a couple locations, but for the most part, it's really just this house. So, having to deal with like, a very small budget, very limited resources, and just a handful of characters and an original concept. It just was all pulled off so well. So this really should be like the gold standard for like, horror filmmaking in general moving forward, I think. Yeah, Anthony Starr was great, of course. Lizzie Kaplan, yeah, the kid actor whose name I don't know offhand. They were all great, like you said. And
Woody
yeah, it
Norman.
really Woody Norman. There you go. He was great. Um, yeah, it really just is sort of structured like a child's nightmare and sort of like puts you back in that perspective as like a little kid where it's like, what's real, what's not, what's that noise? Is that noise, a big monster or is that just all in my head, And as a kid, you trust your parents for everything. You have to rely on them. So it's like exploiting that paranoia of like, well, what if you couldn't trust your parents? What if your parents were lying to you? How would you know? You're 8, stuff like that. And I think it just does that really well. And I think it's really interesting that Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg were producers on this because it just doesn't seem like anything they would have anything to do with at all.
That's been Seth Rogen's MO lately. Also, kind of like we touched on with previous stuff, for some reason, comedians are really good in horror.
True. That is true.
um,
And I'm just curious to see what this director does next because I believe this was like his first like big film, like actual film, other than just like short films. So I'm just really curious to see if he continues in horror because I think he can do some great stuff.
yeah, it looks like the only other thing that he has done um, was a TV series called Marianne that went 8 episodes, and he did all of them. And then, yeah, that's about it. It looks like he did some TV miniseries called Tank, but I can't tell. There's a lot of those. So I don't know which is real, which isn't. I'm just gonna stick with what you said because I can only tell that Marianne and Cobweb are real.
Yes, that's part of it. Is it real? Is it not? Um, yeah, definitely recommend this. This is one of my underrated picks. Okay, so my number one by a long shot, a movie that I've seen 4 times this year, 3 times in the theater, which is the most I've seen a movie in the theater, and I've watched it once over the holiday on 4K. A movie that I plan to continue to rewatch definitely at least once a year moving forward for me is Oppenheimer. I've
Oh, I'm
reflected.
dumb. Of course, this is your number one. How did I forget Oppenheimer? Okay.
Yes. So, not giving too much away about myself, I work in the nuclear industry. I studied nuclear engineering in school. And so, this is something that's right up my alley just from a technical perspective. I love history and being in the nuclear industry. I love nuclear history. And so I am a big fan of Manhattan Project history. And as I think I've alluded to before on the podcast, based on true events movies are one of my favorite genre of movies. So for the longest time, whenever anyone asked me, so like what's like an event in like history or whatnot that you would want adapted into a movie, I was always getting the Manhattan Project. There'd been like mini series. I think like A&E did like a mini series or like sci-fi. Someone did like a mini series in like the 2000s. It was okay. It wasn't really good because it was like a cheap TV budget. But for the longest time, Manhattan Project was up there. And while this is just an Oppenheimer biopic, strictly, that does encompass the Manhattan Project. This gave me everything that I wanted and more. Just Killian Murphy needs to win this Oscar. He really fulfilled this role of Oppenheimer. I just think that Nolan loves nonlinear storytelling, and sometimes it gets jumbled or convoluted. This was, in my opinion, the clearest nonlinear storytelling that I think he did. He like layers these different things while still telling this story, this singular story that moves forward through these like three different timelines, and he pulls it off so effectively, and I think the most effectively. Oppenheimer himself is such a compelling character, and I think that they capitalized on it well. He was a very controversial figure because, during World War II, he had some communist affiliations, which is a major part of the movie, and he had a very complicated ideological worldview where he was sort of like, I'm a communist, but I'm an American communist, and it sort of plays on that ideologically, how that fit in the during World War II and after during like the McCarthy era. But really fundamentally it's about not necessarily survivor's guilt, but it's really just sort of about the consequences of one's actions and the philosophy of like culpability and responsibility. Like Oppenheimer oversees this project to build this bomb that is then used to kill tens of thousands of people. And so, what does that look like for him? How much responsibility does he personally have for what happened? How much what kind of culpability and responsibility does he have? So like it just deals with these really heavy issues, like the consequences of your actions, like and also, can can you and do you have a right to be traumatized by events that you never even witness? Like he doesn't see the bombs go off in Japan. He wasn't there. He doesn't see the consequences, but he still like feels this trauma and this PTSD in the wake, just knowing what it is that he feels like he did. And so it just covers these really interesting philosophical issues, like these really deep personal philosophical issues. And then just across the board, this was just a very faithful adaptation of the true story. They just really pull any scientist of the time. Anyone who knows anything about Manhattan Project history knows all these scientists, and I was just nerding out. At least even now, just as I see more of it, they're just pulling names out of a hat, like, oh yeah, by the way, there's so and so, and it's like, I know that guy. There's an element named after him, or I know that guy. I've seen him in my textbook. It's just cool that Nolan really brought that to life, and I can say, as someone who has studied nuclear engineering and does work in the field, that the science in it is of course very accurate, and I think Nolan incorporated it really well to where it's like, you're learning basically how does a nuclear bomb work and how does just nuclear physics work, but he does it in such like a fun and interesting way. And it's really just a 3-hour movie of talking and Senate hearings and trials and physics, but it's done in such an interesting way that it's like you're glued to the screen the whole time, despite all of that. So Nolan really did it. This is easily my favorite Nolan movie. This is my favorite movie of the year, and I would say it's probably my favorite movie of at least the past couple years, easily. So this is definitely one of getting up there with one of my favorites of all time. So my number one is Oppenheimer.
Yeah, another one I haven't seen. But this one is not for lack of trying. It's not on a streaming service yet, and my dad really wants to watch this. I am not even joking. Every single weekend he goes, "Jacob, is Oppenheimer out yet? Jacob, is Oppenheimer out yet?" And so we will watch this the minute it hits something. Um, so yeah, Barbie
You
did,
definitely
but
should, and then let me know.
Oppenheimer hasn't yet.
Yes,
Do
definitely let
you
me know.
have you heard if it's coming to something anytime soon?
If it comes, I have not heard anything specifically. If it does come to anything, it will be on Peacock because Universal distributed it.
Okay, that works.
But so yeah, number one, Oppenheimer.
Okay. So my no, actually, I'm curious. You try and guess my number one because you're never going to be able to.
Of the year. Oh God, I feel like I should have like
Just take a
I
shot.
should have a list. Okay, hold on one second. I'm just gonna pull up 2023 movies and give it a quick gander. Uh, it's not another horror movie, right? Because you
No,
said that.
that's
Uh,
why you're not going to be able
okay.
to guess it.
Oh gosh, was there like a action movie? Is it an action movie?
That's also why you're not going to be able to guess it. It shouldn't be my number one by my own standards.
Really? Okay, so it's not an action movie or a horror movie?
I know, right?
Okay, I have absolutely no idea then.
All right, here we go. My number one is Strays. So this was a comedy movie about stray dogs. And I remember seeing the trailer for this and kind of chuckling, and I was like, "Oh, I'll watch that. It kind of looks funny. I like dogs." I didn't go and see it in theaters. I waited for it to come out on streaming, and then I watched it, and my lord, was this movie hilarious. Especially if you're a dog owner. They somehow managed to hit every single dog trope you could possibly think of and then make it funny. Randall Park steals the show. Isla Fisher, amazing. I've said on this podcast, I don't like Will Ferrell. He's awesome in this movie. Jamie Foxx, great. Like, all of the voice actors that they get are amazing. Rob Riggle's in it. Will Forte, Dennis Quaid. They, like, they're famous people who had their famous friends be in the movie. I guess is the best way I can put it. But the essentially Will Ferrell plays Reggie, who is a dog to Will Forte's Doug. Reggie doesn't know it, but Will Forte is a terrible dog owner who abuses the crap out of him and one day makes him a stray. He becomes friends with other strays, and then they essentially do like a Stand By Me-esque kind of journey to make it back to Will Forte's house to get revenge, since Reggie now knows that he was a bad owner. Just like, I love this kind of humor. It's very R-rated, so it's not like toilet humor. It's like one step above. But like, generally speaking, I love the taboo. I enjoy raunchy stuff. And this is I don't even know who wrote it. Well, it says directed by Josh Greenbaum. I don't know what else he's done. No movies I've seen. Anyway, just very solid. I liked it so much. I felt so, like I said from the beginning, with rewatchability, I'm gonna eventually watch Cobweb. Like I mentioned how I'm kind of questioning if I'm gonna like it as much now that I know the end. I don't know for sure. With Strays, I was so shocked by how good the movie was. I did not expect it. I came out of it recommending it to every single person. So like, coming back and thinking about making the movie once again, or making the list, like I said at the beginning, a lot of these are very close for me. I didn't like, this isn't necessarily a clear cut number one, but I kind of felt like I had to put it there, just for the pure joy I had when watching this movie. If you are a dog lover, you will like this movie, and you'll like it even more if you like that style of comedy. Imagine if you were watching The Other Guys, but all of them were dogs. That's the best way I can put it. It was just grade A fun. It was awesome. Just a really solid movie, and it's not CGI. They used real dogs, and they trained the dogs to have them do stuff, so that makes it even better.
Yeah, this was one I saw the trailer constantly, like in the theater. It played before all sorts of things, even things that weren't comedies. But yeah, I really wanted to see this. Another one that it's just the timing didn't work out. I didn't realize it was on a streaming service. I Googled it while you were speaking, and I see it's on Peacock. And so I definitely will probably check this out at some point because I really did want to see it, especially with all the talent that was involved. But yeah, I am very
It's
surprised.
shocking how good it is. Yeah, exactly. I'm surprised I put it number one. That's how good it was. It was Ted level good. Like, Ted to me is like one of the king movies for comedy, and I'm not putting Strays over Ted. Don't get me wrong, but I feel like I haven't seen a comedy that's been Ted level in ages, and I would put Strays at least close to that level.
Go. All right. So, do you want to talk about some surprising movies or some disappointing movies first? Just sort of a little bit more rapid fire.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do surprising.
Okay. So, I'm just going to sort of rapid fire off a couple that I would put genuinely surprised me this year, say a little bit about them. I already talked about The Covenant. That one was more or less just surprising because it really just kind of came out of nowhere for me. Like, I hadn't heard much about it, and then it just kind of dropped in that dead space, and it turned out to be in my top 10. Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, I would say, is definitely surprising. I didn't like love Thanksgiving. I didn't think it wasn't one of my favorite horror movies of the year, but I was just surprised because it's like a really tame movie, especially for like an Eli Roth, and it's Eli Roth's tamest, but also his most conventional horror movie, and I think that was definitely a strength here for it. So I was very pleasantly surprised with that. I put Blue Beetle on here. I really liked Blue Beetle. It's still sort of like in my middle DCEU ranking, but I genuinely did like it a good bit. It was like a good 3.5 out of 5. And just for one of those movies that it felt like Warner Brothers was just pooping out, like after they'd already announced that, this doesn't matter anyway. We're rebooting. Here's 4 more movies we just had on the back burner. I didn't really have high hopes, but it actually was pretty good. The Exorcist Believer, which I mentioned in my underrated defending bad movies. This one just got universally just crapped on, and I mean, well, okay, I didn't really enjoy it, but I thought it was pretty decent and pretty solid. So that one genuinely surprised me, especially because David Gordon Green doesn't have the best history, I guess you can say, with tackling these big horror IP franchises. Blumhouse is always kind of hit or miss as much as I love them, and just The Exorcist, what new can you do there? So I liked it a good bit. So that was surprising. I put The Iron Claw on here. This was a more recent movie. It narrowed in my top 10. It's like my number 12. Zac Efron, A24 movie about the Von Erich
Vaughn.
res- Von Erich, thank you. Wrestling family, super tragic story. I knew nothing. I've never watched any wrestling. I knew nothing about the real story. This movie is just tragic and gut wrenching. Zac Efron does an incredible job. And it is just so compelling and captivating. And what's super crazy is apparently they even had to like edit the true story so that the movie wasn't too depressing. And then you watch the movie and you're like, how could it get any worse than this? So that one kind of just came out of nowhere for me. I had Cobweb on there, which we discussed. Definitely a big surprise. I put The Flash on there because it just felt like one of those movies where I enjoy it quite a bit. I liked it a good bit in theaters, and then I rewatched it, and I actually liked it more the second time. And I'm like, is The Flash actually kind of great? Like maybe it's in that like 4 out of 5 potentially territory, just for a movie that it felt like it was one of the worst in terms of like the stories we heard about reshoots and reconfiguring and rewriting and delayed year after year after year. So it's like, oh god, what kind of like corporate product is going to be plopped out? But I thought it was actually pretty good, all things considered. We talked about Saw X. We talked about Godzilla minus one. The last one I'll just mention, Scream 6. Scream 6 is my second favorite of the Scream franchise. The fact that the 5th sequel in a horror slash slasher genre is the second best, and I gave it a 4 out of 5. The fact that like the 5th sequel in a slasher franchise would get that high of praises was just very surprising to me, and I really liked it. A lot of people didn't, but I really liked it. So those are just some of my quick surprising movies of 2023.
Yeah, I guess the only one I would comment on is the Scream 6. I was in I think it's better than 5, but I definitely would not put it second, although you know how much I herald Scream 4. So take that as you will.
I think it's much better than Scream 5 because I didn't like Scream 5.
Yeah, I definitely I know everybody craps on 3. I think I would put 5 even below 3 after rewatching 3.
I did too. I rewatched it before Scream 6, the whole franchise,
Yeah.
and 3 was the one that shot up the most in my ranking. I actually really liked 3 a lot this time.
I agree. I know every I on a good day I might even put 3 above 2. 2 didn't necessarily woo me the second rewatch around, or the most recent rewatch I should say.
2 was my least favorite actually of the whole franchise. Hot take,
Oh,
but
okay. um so going into some of my surprises, I mentioned Strays, I mentioned Cobweb, mentioned No One Will Save You, The Conference, Saw X, Old Dads, really even The Boogeyman, just a lot of movies that I kind of watched that I didn't necessarily think I would. continuing on, Merry Little Batman. This one's more recent. It's a Christmas Batman movie. Obviously, I think I've mentioned I like animated stuff, especially I don't mind watching kids stuff. This one was really solid. I'm a huge Batman fan, so that's probably why. But in an era where we're not getting as much Batman stuff as consistently as I'd like. I actually thought this was pretty fun. It was an interesting twist on the Damian Wayne story, and the person who plays Cricket on Always Sunny played Joker in Merry Little Batman, and I actually thought he did a very good job. So just a shout out to him. Then the Pope's Exorcist. This one I didn't even really expect to like. I didn't even really expect to see. But I will pretty much watch anything with Russell Crowe in it at this point. So there you go. I do hope apparently it did do well enough, but I really hope that gets sequels. They set up a whole universe, and there's a lot in like of the real life stories that could kind of be like a mini Conjuring, where like Ed and Lorraine had a lot of cases. So did the Pope's Exorcist. So that could be cool. The D&D Honor Among Thieves movie. I really didn't expect it to be good. It feels like Hollywood is more likely to fumble those kinds of IPs. So I was actually really happy that the movie turned out well. Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, kind of in the same vein that, like, of course I thought the later entries were fun, but generally speaking, I personally felt like the Transformers franchise had kind of overstayed its welcome with a lot of the more recent entries. But Rise of the Beasts, I felt like was I don't want to say a breath of fresh air, because obviously it's no Oppenheimer, but it did have me excited for the sequels. I know they're going to try and cross over with G.I. Joe, and that just seems cool. I also love the Rise of the Beasts is like my favorite from childhood, so there's a little bit of nostalgia there. TMNT Mutant Mayhem. I really expected this to be terrible, but I actually really liked it. I think part of me was just upset that the original announcement was that Seth Rogen would finally be doing R-rated TMNT, and then it was a kids movie. But it was solid enough, so I will say it was at least a surprise. And then the last one is A Haunting in Venice. I had not watched any of the previous Kenneth Branagh, Agatha Christie movies, so I didn't really know what to expect. But my mom really wanted to see this, so we watched it together for Halloween, and I actually liked it. It was solid. I'm not the biggest like murder mystery person per se, but I actually thought this one was done pretty well. So yeah, that rounds out my list.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these I did put pretty favorably just in my overall ranking. I just wouldn't necessarily say for me they were personally surprising, because a lot of these were kind of in that like 3.5 out of 5 for me. And that's about sort of what I went in. Like, I did see A Haunting in Venice. I thought it was fine. Um, I gave it somewhere in that 3 to 3.5 out of 5 range. I had only seen Murder on the Orient Express, which I didn't really like. And
I heard that
then
one wasn't good.
yeah, it was kind of just eh. And then I didn't see Death on the Nile because I heard that one was even worse. But pretty universally too, it seems like Haunting in Venice was most people's favorite. So yeah, I liked it a good bit. It was interesting for sure. I am a little bit more in that sort of like murder mystery sort of genre, so I kind of liked that, and curious to see if they'll keep going with that, because if they keep going a trend like that, I could see myself liking a lot of those movies more.
Mhm.
Yeah, I saw Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. That was when I was playing catch up over the holidays. Yeah. So I liked it. I think it's definitely promising for this to be the continuation of a new franchise, and I don't want to spoil the ending, but potentially other franchises that could arise from this. Um,
I think I already
but
spoiled it.
yeah, I mean, I still am a fan of Bayformers. Not like a huge fan, but I still put at least like the original and Dark of the Moon and even Age of Extinction, which I personally really like more than most, over Rise of the Beasts, but it's still definitely better than like The Last Night and, in my opinion, Bumblebee, because I don't really like Bumblebee that much except for Haley
I would agree
Steinfeld.
with that sentiment.
So yeah, so that one was good. Yeah, overall, just the ones that you mentioned, those were like in my solid category for the most part. I just didn't necessarily expect more than that solid category, so that's why I just didn't consider them surprising.
Yeah, that's fair. I think the reason why I have them here is because I expected them all to be trash, and at least in my general opinion, they were not. So that's kind of how I picked this little list. Do you want to move on into disappointing?
Yes, we'll do sort of similar run through these. I have like a top 10 in front of me, so I'm just going to run through. This one sort of just needs a huge disclaimer, but I do put it on here. I'm putting Across the Spider-Verse here only because I love Into the Spider-Verse. It is a 5 out of 5 perfect movie for me. It is my favorite Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man being one of my favorite characters in fiction. And it just in general is in one of my, easily in my top 10 superhero movies, maybe even top 5 superhero. Just overall, it's one of my favorite movies. And then Across the Spider-Verse was really good. I gave it a 4 out of 5, but it's just the fact that you got that huge step down from 5 out of 5, perfect film, best Spider-Man movie, one of the top superhero movies in general, to really good is still kind of a big gap. And so this one was really hyped. And yeah, I mean, yeah, there was just some stuff I felt like it was a little too overstuffed. I felt like it went on a little way too long. It kind of took the focus off Miles, really. He didn't really feel as much of a main character in his own movie because it introduced all these other characters. I was so attached to the team in the original, like Spider-Man Noir, Peter B. Parker, Peter Porker, like them. And just the fact that they really don't return, except for Peter B. Parker a little bit. I was a little bit, let down by that. And what I liked about them in the first movie was just we really got to there was a handful of multiverse Spider-Men, so we kind of got to really know them. I feel like this one they were really just throwing everything out there for the sake of like, oh look, there's Bagman and there's Spider-Man PS4 and there's whatever, which is cool, but you just don't really get to it just feels overcrowded and you don't get to know those characters specifically. And in contrast to Dead Reckoning, I think this one has really bad part one syndrome where it really feels like it just cuts off. It's a very unsatisfying ending. Like, oh, wait for part two. It doesn't even close its own story because it's really one big story just chopped into two. So, another thing I didn't really like, especially because we probably won't see that movie for another year or so, at least. So, yeah, Across the Spider Verse is there. 65 is there. I did watch this on Netflix with Adam Driver. It's so dull. It's so boring. You have Adam Driver as a futuristic guy killing dinosaurs with futuristic weapons. This should be a lot cooler than it is. And it was really just boring and kind of meh. I put Totally Killer on there, which is this like Back to the Future slasher comedy. Just I'm a huge fan of that sort of genre. Like I love Happy Death Day. I love Freaky. This felt like it was trying to be like a Happy Death Day, freaky sort of like horror comedy sort of deal. It really just wasn't that good. It was just kind of just bleh. I put Napoleon on here. Napoleon was all right, but Ridley Scott coming back to the historical epic genre with someone like talent like Joaquin Phoenix in the lead role, you'd expect it to be this like huge, epic spectacle like Gladiator, but it really was also just fine. I put Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania on here, introducing Kang the Conqueror, who's supposed to be the big bad of this entire saga, the biggest bad the Avengers have ever fought. And then you have Ant-Man defeat him with ants. And, interesting creative direction, but very underwhelming. I put Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom here. It was fine. It was not as good as the first one, but it's just the fact that it was the capstone of the DCEU and there's like no reference to it. Like it's not even like anything ceremonial. So that was definitely a huge disappointment. I put VHS 85 on here. I'm a huge fan of the VHS franchise. VHS 85 had like one or two decent segments, and I liked the frame story, but for the most part, it just had some segments that really were just very subpar. So, uh, not as big of a fan there. I put John Wick Chapter 4 there, and then Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny. Just, I don't know. This one was just, I might need to rewatch it, but it is like a 3 out of 5 for me, which breaks my heart as someone who loves the Indiana Jones franchise. It just felt so unnecessary and it felt like Disney product. it really, because Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, for better or worse, really wraps up Indy's story well. And then this one just really digs the grave and brings 80-year-old Harrison Ford back for no reason, undoes all the good ending he got in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and is just like, hey, what if we did this again, but CGI'd everything and Disney released it for $300 million? So it really just felt like product, like what they did with Star Wars, they did to Indiana Jones. And lastly, the one that I put last because I figured we'd have a little bit more of a discussion on it, I put Rebel Moon because this was so mid and it was so criminally mid. So I'll leave it there if you want to go through some of yours. And then if you want to talk about Rebel Moon real quick, we can talk about Rebel Moon.
Yeah, I'll end with Rebel Moon and we can end on that discussion. I'll go through a couple of my disappointing. A lot of the ones you mentioned I had on my list and now I'm just not going to watch. So thank you for that. For me, I have Super Mario Bros. I know that may seem weird because it was heralded this year, but for me personally, I think maybe people raised the bar too much because I just kind of thought it was okay. I don't really think I would even rewatch it. Expendables 4, not that I expected it to be great, but I love the original trilogy. They had been trying to make the fourth movie for the better part of a decade, and I guess I should have just assumed it would come back and be trash. It was trash, but that was still disappointing. I kind of had some optimism. Equalizer 3, the first two I actually think are really good, and the third one isn't bad per se. I see what they were going for, but for me personally, it loses a lot of the Equalizer flair that we'd had in the first two. I love Denzel. He's pretty much good in anything, but this just didn't live up to what I really thought it could be to end the trilogy. I put Murder Mystery 2 on here. I know that's a really random one. I actually really like the first one. I think it's one of those underrated Netflix gems, and the second one was just kind of terrible. And then the Extraction 2, I kind of similar to what I just said with Murder Mystery. I really liked the first Extraction, so I was excited for the second one. But except for that 17-minute prison breakout scene, that's literally all one shot, by the way. Like, I would herald the director for that one pure take of going from inside a prison to a helicopter fight on a train. But other than that, I really didn't like it. I kind of felt like it dragged from leading up to that point, and after that point, I felt like the story wasn't really that good, and yeah, so like it had that one key point, but that's where I left it. And then similarly, Fast X I felt was very disappointing. I really love the Fast and Furious franchise, and the story of this movie was terrible. I'm just going to say that right now. However, and you're going to think I'm crazy, Jason Momoa's character in this may be one of the best villains I've seen in a movie. I was trying to make a list to see who I'd really put up there, and he's top 10 for sure. I don't know how high yet. I haven't ironed it out, but his villain is amazing. It's the only reason to watch this movie. I haven't rewatched it yet because of how bad the story is, but I really want to just to have more fun with Momoa's character. Alan Richardson's great. Spoiler alert, big spoiler alert. Of course, The Rock is back, and his post-credit scene is really cool for the future, but I don't know if that really says anything to the movie. That just makes Fast 11 more exciting. But yeah, Fast X was a really big letdown for me. I was just hoping for more. These movies probably shouldn't keep going. They're supposed to end with 11 and 12. We'll see, because it was originally supposed to just be 10, 11. But yeah, so excited for Momoa's villain to return. And then lastly, Rebel Moon. So now we can have the Rebel Moon discussion. Kind of like you said, this was just like I put this as one of my honorable mentions for my most. I had Rebel Moon Part 2 as one of my honorable mentions for most anticipated for 2024. And that should probably show how optimistic I was that I would like this. I am not as much of a Snyder shill as you are. However, I do like the guy, and the idea of this seemed cool, and I liked a lot of the cast. So I was game. Clearly I should not have been. The best way I can put this is the first 20 to 30 minutes, if I remember correctly, when they're building out the lore and we're in the little farm town village thing, that part is great in my opinion. I think that part is written very well. I'll just cut out that little middle part.
Okay, you were talking about the gathering the team or whatever.
Yes. It just becomes a uh gather it just becomes a the gathering the team montage. However, it's not a montage. It's an hour and a half. And that really disappointed me because they essentially go, "Oh, by the way, there's also this guy on X planet and we're going to go introduce you to this person." And essentially but you're supposed to really care for them as they then go and fight. And then, in my personal opinion, they do a twist that I think an 8-year-old could have seen coming. And then, also, in my opinion, I know he's not known. Actually, he may be known for great action sequences based off the movies he's done. To me, the Rebel Moon action was not good. The only thing I really liked about this movie was the cinematography. I thought that the visuals were amazing in the way that he was creating the actual space. But other than that, um, I pretty much was let down by everything else. Uh, no offense to Sophia Boutella, but I just was not invested in her character at all, and I know she's the character they developed the most. So take that as you will.
Yeah, I just as the resident Snyder shill, this was a movie I was really looking forward to for a long time. Seeing Snyder, he sort of took like a huge hiatus between what happened with Justice League and then before he released his Snyder cut, there was like a 4 or 5 year gap. And so this was one of his big like original projects that he was working on. And he hadn't done an original project in like 10 years. And I think there's a good reason why and why he should not do one again. But yeah, it's just so dull. Like the whole storytelling, all the characters. And I think, Snyder is a visuals guy. I thought the cinematography was kind of just dull. Like, I don't know, it just everything about it, it just seemed like overly overuse of CGI and just flat and dull. And, Sophia Bautella, I'm not, nothing against her personally, but I thought her acting was really kind of just flat. Not even just her
I
character. Like, I just felt like her acting really wasn't that good in this.
agree.
And,
She tried
it's
really
got the
hard.
star-studded cast who are doing what they can, but like you said, like none of these characters really have an arc. It really is just like, hey, we're going to this cool sci-fi location to get this cool sci-fi person that you're never going to see again. They'll be there in the background, but you never hear them speak again. And yeah, it this feels like a movie that is chopped to pieces and barely pasted together. And, Netflix, whether it's Netflix or Snyder or whoever, but I feel like they're trying to reverse engineer a Snyder cut because they basically, when this movie dropped, they're like, oh, but next year you can see the director's cut, which is basically a whole other movie. And it's like an hour longer. And you can tell that this movie was chopped to pieces. Like it really goes from like point A to point D to point K to point whatever. Like there's just like little hints. Like there was one point specifically, I can't even remember what it was. They like mentioned something about a character, like, oh, that's why, you did this. And it's like, what are they talking about? Like they clearly cut out whatever they were referencing, but they still keep the reference in. So it's just little stuff like that where it just feels like something's missing. And there's several points in here where you just feel it missing. And so, yeah, this was just very disappointing. It really just feels like he's doing because this all started because he pitched a Star Wars movie. Lucasfilm turned him down. This feels like exactly what it is. It feels like Zack Snyder doing Star Wars, but he's not legally allowed to do Star Wars because it's so derivative. There's nothing original here, nothing creative. It's just Star Wars and a couple other sci-fi tropes and cliches just blended together. And so, yeah, I was very disappointed with that because I didn't think any of the world building, any of the lore was unique at all. It just felt like, yeah, it just felt like Star Wars, and it just felt like every sci-fi trope ever. Um, so yeah, was definitely very disappointed in this. Honestly, I'm not even that excited for part two, and honestly, I really don't even know if I'm gonna watch the director's cut when it does drop, even if it does improve it. I just think at its core it's not something that can really be improved that much in my mind, if that makes sense.
No, that definitely makes sense. I said earlier, the fact that this was the one of the worst twists I had seen in a movie in a while. That I don't know, it's weird. I I think I feel like I may give him the benefit of the doubt and watch the director's cut. I don't know. I think part of me isn't it's like that addictive mindset of like not wanting to let go. Like I wanted to like it so badly. Maybe if I just watch the director's cut, it'll be good. I don't know. I could just be delusional.
Yeah, I think Snyder, and I'm going to be very careful with this comparison here. I feel like Snyder is very much like a George Lucas, where he's a great director. He is good at big picture stuff, but he really can't write anything to save his life, and he should not be in charge of the script or the finer details. Like I think for Snyder, if it is an original project, I think he should be like the story creator. He should storyboard it. He should direct it, maybe even do like the outline, but he should not touch the script. I feel like that's sort of like that's how Lucas was, and I feel like that's sort of how Snyder is.
No, I think that's definitely fair. And that's also not necessarily a bad thing. There are some people who are just good at one thing and not the other, and you should lean into your strength. And I don't think there is nothing wrong with that. Um, so yeah.
Completely agree. All right, 2023 wrapped up.